Yeah, films. We watched some films. Now let's talk about those films.
Today we're going to be talking about Kumiho, like I said, and it's a little different because we're going to be talking about an episode of a series that one day I think we'll probably cover the entire series or like pieces of the series as a whole. But this specific episode is really like can be taken as a standalone. It applies to the rest of the series, but I remember when it came out, everyone was very confused because they were like, whoa, we're like back in time. This whole thing is happening. And why are we here? And why do we even have to hear from this character? What does it matter? And so it is very interesting to kind of explore it as an individual as opposed to the entire series. So we are covering episode 6 of Lovecraft Country titled Meet Me in Daegu. And it's because it's solely focusing on Gia, who is Tick's former love interest. So like we still get a little bit of, like we do get some backstory for Tick and we get some backstory for some supernatural elements, but it's so independent of what's happening back at home for Tick that it's kind of interesting that that an entire episode was dedicated to it.
It's kind of cool. It's like its own little movie. And it's one thing that's cool about it, it's like most of the dialogue until we're introduced to Tick is in Korean. So that's like also pretty cool. You like feel transported in that way as well.
Yeah. And, you know, I love Korean media. So it wasn't hard to just like listen to and read subtitles because I was like, oh, yeah, this is like what I would do anyway.
Subtitles.
Yeah.
Accessibility helps everybody, but also it helps learn languages.
Yeah. And you also get to open worlds, it's like an open book to different worlds, right? Like where you get to experience different cultures and media. Just because we can read it, but I would say the only thing that makes it not like incredibly sufficient as a standalone is that it does leave on a little bit of a cliffhanger because it does apply to what's happening with Tick, and so then we see her later. But up until this episode, she really was just like that one. She was like the red Martian girl in the opening scene that Tick sees. But we don't really ever get to see her until late, and everyone's like, what? Like,
she's like this ominous kind of being that like communicates with Tick through the phone, but like you don't really get to have much of an understanding of like why or like what the actual story is. I think we should eventually probably find like movies about it, like Kumiho specifically.
Oh yeah,
because there are some, and there was apparently a K-drama where it's like my roommate is a Kumiho, and I was like, well, now I want to watch this. It's not horror, but like maybe, I don't know, maybe it has like elements. It's pretty fun.
And again, because it's the way that they approach that story and like that type of monster that can make it fun. But I just really love Gia in Lovecraft Country, and we really wanted to tell different monsters because other monsters exist, and specifically in Lovecraft Country, right, is like we are so focused on this the dichotomous relationship of like the monster and like the monster of America, and just like the characters kind of struggling with the supernatural, and then we're in like Korea and there's like this whole other approach to the supernatural that was just like accepted, right? Like it was just like this is just reality. This is how it happens. And so there's this whole different understanding.
Monsters exist that outside of what the very racist Lovecraft man imagined up.
He's not the only one who knows of them or works with them. Although like the way that they portray the fox spirit in this is kind of Lovecraftian and like that it's kind of tentacles, you know, and stuff like that. So that's kind of interesting. But I mean, it fits in so perfectly because of that. Like, it makes sense that like her monster exists in a world where all these other monsters also exist.
For sure,
which is super fun. So we loved it. And like I said, we'll talk about Lovecraft Country, the series, in a future episode. We have covered Lovecraft Country, the book, in a previous episode. So if you want to check that out just to hear about some of the differences, though it's like the show hadn't been out yet, so it's not like this doesn't happen, this does. I'm just like, here's what happens in the book, and it's kind of fun. There is no Gia in the book, so it's completely standalone and made for the show, and it's very interesting. All right, so let me hop into my section. So, like I said, we're talking about Lovecraft Country, Meet Me in Daegu, which is premiered in 2020, and it is about in the throes of the Korean War, nursing student Gia crosses paths with a wounded Atticus who has no recollection of their violent first encounter, and is directed by Helen Shaver. And it's, like I said, so standalone. There's a lot of really interesting discussions about being a woman and existing in society, and falling victims to certain oppressive qualities to fit in and do what is expected of you, to avoid shame. And so a lot of things, there's a lot of levels to each one of the women that are featured in this show. And like when Tick is, I would say I had a hard time really resonating with Tick throughout the entire series. And I would say this episode does a really good job of humanizing him and kind of putting his experiences into context so that you can understand him for the rest of the series and kind of understand some of the motivations and just where he's coming from in a way that, like, if we hadn't gotten this glimpse, I don't know if I would ever have really understood or appreciated Tick.
Because you get some insight into like the specific trauma that he he experienced. And the many levels of that, like in Gia exploring her identity and finding herself, like Tick is also doing that, and they can help each other. And they're like from different angles, like they have different reasons why they are being oppressed or being forced into these little boxes and told how to operate. And so it's kind of like through each other are able to do that. But there's also the show also has a lot of very interesting and like I'm grateful for some of the queer representation that happens in the show, specifically with certain characters that are usually not seen in or just on television, being queer. And so I was very thankful. And in this episode, we do have some queer undertones that I think, were she not the love interest for Tick in this way, she very easily could have just been exploring that. And like, there could be a whole film about that. It's like, we got a whole film about her actually, like, while she's figuring herself out and learning to love herself, that she's also, like that comparison of being monstrous is also because society is homophobic as well, and in ways. So
I like the exploration of the monster was like really interesting, and it was very not subtle about how, as you were saying, like how Tick is experienced this like very monstrous experience and also just being monsterized by society. And then Gia, who is a literal embodiment of an actual monster, is like, they're finding humanity's horrible and filled with monsters. And why are we separating?
And we're not the ones. We're not the monsters.
It's like everyone is a little bit monstrous. And it doesn't mean no one deserves happiness or love. So yeah, I thought that was also cool.
Yeah. And let me tell you about it. Let me tell you all about why. So season 1, episode 6 of Lovecraft Country takes a step back from the plot, from Tick and the others' adventures, discoveries, and nightmares, and we get to learn about the past flame Gia and her monstrous origins. So Gia is a young Korean woman who had actually been sexually abused as a child by her mother's husband. And to save Gia, her mother consulted a female shaman who then invited a kumiho fox spirit to inhabit her body and protect her. And what we learn about this spirit is that it is essentially the Gia we know and have always known in this episode, and had swapped out the original girl for this monstrous spirit creature, allegedly, right? Though it's kind of just an allegory for when abuse happens, such as that you are no longer the person that you once were, and that you sometimes are just this coping mechanism trying to continue to exist and protect yourself. And so she was Gia. Like, that's the problem with her mom. She was Gia. It's just like, this is the Gia that has to that has had to learn how to live throughout this. So there's a lot of levels to it. But in order to get her daughter back, supposedly, the original Gia that her mother thinks is still out there, her mother tells her that she needs to devour 100 souls of men. And to extract these souls, Gia lures men to her home with promises of sex. And in the midst of men's passion, she unleashes 9 tails, one from every orifice. Yes, every orifice that connects to the man into their orifices.
Yes.
Orifici. And connect it. You see like the one, and he's like, oh, and I was like, I know where that one went.
That's good.
It's very good. Then she siphons his life energy and memories from before in their entire life. She gets to see them. She gets to experience them and remember them. And at some point, that's all she remembers is their life, and none of it is her own. And then they burst into a lot of blood, and that's it. That's what they are. So yes, it's horror. Like Lovecraft Country is incredibly horror.
Scene, though, like, when the man explodes.
Yeah, and she's just like,
like you're just sitting there like, that happened. Yes.
Yeah. Especially because it happens like she has been, trying to go on these blind dates because she confides in someone that her mother didn't ask her to bring home a man. Her mother demanded that she bring home a man. And so she goes on these, she's in a speed dating thing, and none of the men are really getting her. And then eventually she goes to a bar, and she's like all of a sudden this kind of different creature. Like she's sexual. She's has this whole different energy from before where she was kind of polite and soft. And I think both of those Gias are Gia. So it's she doesn't just become a I think this is both of her. But she lures this man, and he's like, yeah, let's go. And he's clearly having a very good time. And she's like, all right, whatever. She's gorgeous. Text the cat. I said, she is really pretty. And then immediately after that, the dialogue is the man being like, you're so pretty. And I was like, dang it. I don't want to be this guy, but it's true.
I don't want to explode.
And then he's in the middle, in 30 seconds, he's ready to go. And then he's so enraptured by this whole experience that he doesn't notice that she has all these tentacles coming out of all of her parts. And the tentacles are really gross. They're furry,
fuzzy. Yeah.
And they got almost like nails or claws, a part of, or teeth, I guess, are a part of them too. And you kind of see them as what a great the show is really great at gore and just being really gross or just doing things that are unexpected and horrifying. And you're like,
with the human
God.
Body, yeah.
Yeah. So he does that. And then he's just literally there's no guts is what it is. There's no
they liquefy.
It's just liquefied. And then she's just putting out the candle. She's like, all right, another day, another blood
exploded body. Yeah.
For my youth.
I bathe in the blood of my enemies.
Yeah, we all should. No, I'm kidding. Don't do that. You don't condone that. Anyway, essentially she has to devour 100 men in this way. And Kat will explain in her section what the Cameo represents, but it's no mistake that she is eating the souls of men specifically, like we've covered. Generally, when you're monstrosizing women, it's because we have to fight back against what men are doing to us, and this is what we do. And so it's either women are awful and they manipulate us, or we're empowered and this is how it comes out. So souls of men. And during the Korean War, where American soldiers have made her town their home, abusing and murdering the very people they were supposed to protect, she should have no challenge finding bad men to remove from the world. And that is until she meets Tick and learns to love herself as she is. And when we first meet Tick in this episode, like it said in the description, you don't know why he's still alive, how he managed to survive, because he didn't deserve it. But this episode offers, at first, Okay.
Yeah.
But this episode offers us a glimpse into the complicated identity that Gia holds. We see her obsessed with Judy Garland and American cinema because the theater is an escape from the instability and fear of the world around her. We see her struggle against the ideology that she cannot feel love nor be loved. That's what her mother tells her, that as a monster, she doesn't have this ability. And it's a question of like, if we kind of step away from the fact that she's a literal monster and this is just a personification of her trauma, is it because of that trauma that she can't be loved or find love?
And like what
that
a messed up thing that a mom would say to their child, but yeah,
exactly,
like,
exactly.
If that's what it actually went like.
Yeah, and a part of that is like a part of it is also like the mother's guilt on her because it was her husband, and there's a scene where Gia kind of confronts her and is like, all I know is that abuse from him. I don't know anything else about him, and I don't know what is wrong with it because you never really told me that. And she essentially says like he chose you because you had a daughter out of wedlock and that you wouldn't do anything about it because you didn't want to live with the shame that society was putting on you because of that. Like you needed to earn your place back in society at the expense of your daughter. And now I'm this monster. And so it is like that, like this familial, like burden that you've put onto me. And then you reinforce that by saying, now I no longer am deserving of love and am incompatible, like incapable of loving. So it's a lot.
It's like not recognizing the systemic issue of like what put the mom in a vulnerable position in the first place, and then also just like not recognizing what the real problem was. But it was a lot.
But like, the mom is also caught in her own trauma, but she doesn't have the time.
Never got to heal from it either.
So it just becomes cyclical. That's what happens. So something that's super interesting about this episode and about Gia's story actually is that she begins a friendship that at times felt like so much more than that. There's just an intimacy and a closeness that I think exceeds friendship and was a necessity for her. And it's with a fellow nurse named Youngja. And Youngja is a cool girl. Like she speaks informally with men and catches their attention. And like, that's a big deal. Like we've talked about in Squid Game, just like specifically with Korean culture, there's like ways that you're supposed to, honorifics, way you're supposed to talk to people. And so it's like a big deal that she like is okay with the fact that this guy started talking to her informally and all the girls are like, what? Gia sees her like fold her socks a certain way. So she tries to like keep up with that. So like Youngja is just really cool and she keeps up with trends and she's an activist and she isn't afraid to be herself, more importantly, and also is very adamant about other people being themselves and like appreciating who they are and just being that, right? And so Gia becomes interested in Youngja and starts mirroring her behaviors and style to fit in, because again, she hasn't quite figured out how to be human in the way that people are expecting her to be. And so she kind of like mimics her to get to that. And soon through like these soft touches, there's a lot of hand holding and these shared intimate moments, the women become best friends. They get very close. And Youngja tells Gia, there's nothing wrong with being different. What is wrong is them vilifying us, essentially. And when I was watching this, I was very much reading into this as like Gia struggling with her sexuality, not just like literally she's a monster, because like Youngja doesn't know she's a monster. Like Youngja doesn't know she's a nine-tailed fox. Like she doesn't know that. What she knows is that Gia feels some kind of confliction within her and that she does not feel comfortable in her own skin, that she is controlled and manipulated into a specific form by her mother and kind of overwhelmed by the burden of that expectation. And that part of that could stem from the connection that they feel. And so she's trying to allow Gia the space to realize that she's not a monster. Yeah. And like, she is like a monster and that she's a nine-tailed fox. But that's really like, and it's portrayed as the overarching point of contention between her and her mother, but there's so much more happening here, obviously. That's how media works. But the fact is that Gia is continually pressured to fit in and be what her mother tells her to be, and she is wrong if she operates otherwise. The expectation of women in this society at that time, and even still, is that of a respectable, obedient, and pure woman. Gia's existence is in direct opposition to the proper way to be, and furthermore, Gia's change came after the abuse from her father. Like I said, she had transformed for protection. Her mother can no longer view her as the daughter as she had been. She's changed now. And having her innocence and autonomy stolen from her, first by her stepfather, then by her mother, who cursed her, only to then shut her off emotionally. And then lastly, everyone else, right?
Yeah.
Like the men in Daegu don't care for her. They don't understand her interest in like Western media, and they find her awkward, like clearly playing the part of sociable without ever being that. Like she tries to, like I said, mimic Youngja in the way that she operates. So she's like, I'm going to call you Oppa and like be really overly friendly with you. And the guy's like, that's weird. And then the next guy, she's like, let's have something in common. And he was like, he actually says really something interesting because she really loves Western media. And he's like, you know, the Japanese spent 50 years trying to erase our culture. Why are you obsessed with this? Like, we should be preserving what we are. And kind of just dismissing her love for Judy Garland. And then she does end up with a connection to a man who also likes Judy Garland, but he still crosses her off and ends up like wanting to go out with Youngja. And I think the biggest part of that is Youngja comes up and talks to her and is like, come out to coffee with me. This guy is actually a bore. Like that she's not so desperate that she's grabbing any man she can find. But she's just like, I'm just trying to be nice. This is what it's expected of me. So I'm going to go for coffee. But it's kind of like, it's because I don't want anything to do with this man. I want you to be there. Please pick up on the fact that I want to be close to you. And she says, like, I hope that you reconsider and you do hang out with me. But it was just really interesting because you kind of see this moment for Gia when she's talking to that guy, like, oh, maybe she found one. And then it's like, he's not even worth it. Like you're grabbing onto straw, like nothing, like literally nothing that's appealing. He's boring. And you just don't know that because you're trying to have anything.
Just trying to meet like, the expectations of what everyone else is putting onto her and like expectations of who she should be or how she should operate.
Yeah.
Sure.
And Youngja immediately is like, don't do that.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that, hon. Then there's also the American men who are stationed here that see her as like an exotic meal. They're often hooting and hollering at her, catcalling her, saying things about her. And so they're not seeing her as an individual person, but as an object, essentially a set piece in the environment that they're tasked with protecting. She's she's like another building to them, right? They're going to go home one day and forget who she was forever. She's less than a person because she's Korean as well to them. So there's a lot of levels to that. So it isn't until she has this experience of connection with Youngja, of being seen and appreciated and told that she is enough just as she is, that she can allow herself to be loved and to love in return. And it's like a whole moment for her, like talking to her mother, like, actually, I can love. Turns out I have been doing it for a minute. I've been doing that. So I found this like interview with actress Jamie Chung, who plays Gia, on the website Datebook. And she discusses the depth of Gia and her Kumiho. And she says, you have this young girl who didn't have control over her own body, was sexually assaulted, and then you have the Kumiho that takes over her body, and through all of these sexual experiences, she gets control. She has control when she's seducing these men and taking their souls, and it's rare when sexuality is used from a female perspective where they also have control of the situation. Which is true, right? Like, same thing with Jennifer's body. That's what we were hoping for, was for her to be able to use it as a tool. And at some points, like, she does. Like, it is a point of power, and she doesn't feel afraid of men because she has the ability to do this. Though there's a moment with Tick where she, like, there are times where she's afraid, but she still has some power that she can hold Like she can kill you at any time. She's just like, and it'll be your fault because you want, like, you mistook any of this like connection or like interaction as you having a right to her body.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's many things to unpack in this episode. We get to see new parts of Tick that we hadn't before. Like we get to see this monstrous soldier who murders when ordered to, which is really like you see him and he's like cold, like dead-eyed when he does it. Like he has to turn off certain parts of him to commit this act. And this is the first time Gia meets him. And it's where he's helping murder young women and ultimately takes her best friend away, where she obviously dies after being tortured. But we also get to see an intimate part of Tick that we've gotten in small doses up until this point, but it's this repentant, soft, virgin bookworm that he is inside, like this just sweet, soft boy that
before
he has
trauma transformed.
Yeah, that he's had to like pocket away because he's in the middle of a war. And Gia finds similarities in Tick that she never would have guessed. Because once she's convinced that she would kill him, because she recognizes him, he doesn't recognize her, obviously. And she's like, I'm going to kill him. So she begins to get close to him. Yeah, rightfully so. And she actually starts to learn about America specifically and its inequalities. After asking him if he knows Judy Garland, it's him and a friend of his who's also Korean, but he's Korean American. And so they have this whole conversation about how he can't fit in America and he can't fit in here. He just doesn't belong anywhere. And then, Tick explains like, like Black people are not treated any type of well in my country. And she's like, why would you fight for a country that doesn't care about you? And she learns about like his struggles with his own father and the complexities that come with fighting a war for a country that oppresses him and his people. She finds out about the lack of autonomy that he has being a soldier in this war, and how sometimes those escapes that we have built up for ourselves, like for her, the movies, and for him, the books, aren't enough anymore. And like specifically in like, there's so much that can be said about Tick, like in that episode and just like getting that glimpse, like I said, but for this series, we're talking about Gia and her monstrous femme journey. And so I think through her relationships with young Gia and Tick, she finds that she can find love and be loved specifically. And she confronts her mother's biases and learns to subdue her tales, even when intimate with Tick, like having this connection with her monster as opposed to just wanting to rid herself of it. She starts to kind of accept it as a part of her and not something that needs to be vanquished or removed. It's just like, this is what I live with. This is a part of my power. And it's a coping mechanism that has saved me all this time. And at one point she tells Tick, we have done monstrous things, but we are not monsters, because she is learning to love herself as much as to love others and to no longer feel like a visitor or an invader in her own body, and instead to embrace who she is and accept herself as the true Gia, right? Not the girl who replaced the other one. This is just what Gia has become, which just happens to be a monstrous femme, and that's okay.
Yeah. Like, let her, honestly. It's like there was so much going on that like made it really emotional. Like watching her journey was really emotional in that like she had never been given like the chance to figure out who she was, be her authentic self. And like I thought like the connection with Young Jo was so powerful, and that like to see kind of who you want to become in another person is like a really powerful thing. And yeah, the entire development of her character was like really interesting, and it actually differs in a lot of ways from the actual like lore associated with a cameo. In that like the method of achieving humanity is the opposite of what Gia is tasked with doing. Like you're supposed to abstain from eating human flesh instead of encouraged to eat human flesh.
I do think there's a lot of question that happens when she's doing that, like with her mom is like, you only need 3 more souls or whatever. And she's like, did they tell you that? Like, she's like, who told you that?
Like, how do you know?
And she's like, and is that all that they said? Because she's like doubting it. She's like, I don't believe you. And I think part of it is that I don't think that's true. I don't think she was the 100th soul or whatever was going to release her. Because again, she's her. She just also like exists with this spirit. But I think it really was that her mom, like, for one, the fact that she put the curse on her daughter to protect her, even though it made her into a victim even more. But I think she was using her as a tool to get back at men specifically. Like, I don't think that it was true that 100 souls would release her. And instead, she was like, all men are evil, and I'm going to use my daughter, who's now a monster, to do
tool
that.
Of vengeance.
Yeah. So that's what I think.
Yeah, and I mean, it was really interesting too, like the like overtones of queerness. I was like wondering, like, if Jia even did like having sex with these men, and like it was very interesting, and like kind of wondering, like, what is the actual, like, who would Jia be without these predetermined things that she's forced to be? Would she get to go? If Young Jia was not unjustly murdered, like, would they have had a happy ending? Would there have been like a whole other arc with this like storyline that would have been really cool?
Yeah.
And I guess we can just always be like, I don't know, because we can't know. Ultimately.
But she like never, like, you can tell she was never enjoying a sexual interaction with man until Tick, and it was until this moment where it was like intentional, and it was not. It was like for her as much it was for him, and it wasn't just like I have to complete this task. So it's wondering, like, just like how, like, if she really, like, maybe she's even like pansexual, because she only really
do you need that like emotional connection to kind of establish what you want? That's super real. And I think not to say anyone else, I'm not going to assume anyone else's experience, but I related very much to, it is a task. You're just going. Yeah. I've had that kind of experience before. Luckily, that is not my current experience, but like, that's so real. Like, they don't explode at the end into blood and guts all over the walls. But ultimately, do they continue to exist in my life tomorrow?
Ways.
No.
Yes.